Hi, I'm Jim Hodges, Research Director at Heavy Reading, Cloud and Security, now part of Omdia. And today I'm joined by Darren Anstey, who is CTO of Security at Nesco. So welcome, Darren.
Thank you.
Service providers and security. It's always something service providers are very vigilant about how they manage security and responding to ongoing threats, and they do a very good job doing it. But I think the very nature of security and the threat landscape is always evolving. I guess I'm just wondering, to me it's something I think that in this kind of new model we find ourselves in, service providers need to be always sort of reevaluating their security strategies and their postures. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I think it is an ongoing battle, as you kind of said. Attackers are always trying to outwit the defenses that we put in place. They're trying to adapt their strategies, and we as helpers of the service providers around the world, we help them to adapt their defensive capabilities to deal with the attacks that are coming in. I think the key thing that's changed recently is the speed at which we're seeing that cycle take place is
exactly
kind of ever accelerating. We're seeing the attackers have access now to much more sophisticated tools that are using more sophisticated attack vectors. They're doing more sophisticated things in terms of where the attacks come from. They're using more powerful bots. There's a whole range of different things that they're doing, which is kind of accelerating that cycle. So our customers, the service providers, are having to adapt their defenses more quickly to deal with the attacks that are coming in. They're having to, move to using layered defenses more. They're having to use threat intelligence more to get ahead of the attackers so that they can predict where the attacks are going to come from and then detect them more quickly and mitigate them more proactively. But yeah, it is an ongoing battle. It will continue as long as there are adversaries out there, but it's the speed at which it's happening that's changed.
Yeah, interesting. And I think in terms of the complexity, that's one part, but also the volumes. DDoS is something, DDoS in 2024, there's some huge DDoS volumes, and I expect that'll happen in 2025 in terms of the volumes. What do you think?
In terms of numbers of attacks that are going on out there, that is something that is ever increasing. If you look at what's driving DDoS attacks out there today, there's always been gaming and gaming-related attacks. That's been there pretty much forever. The big change that everyone, I think, sees in the media is how DDoS is related to major geopolitical conflict. So we've all seen, storms of attacks around Israel, around Russia, around Ukraine, and around other countries and organizations that have been vocal about supporting or not supporting, any of those. I think what we're seeing now, though, is that DDoS kind of echoes any kind of political conflict, any kind of protest, any kind of election that's happening anywhere around the world. And that's something that we've seen really escalate over the past few years, right, everywhere, fundamentally. So I do expect to see ever-increasing frequencies of attacks. I do expect to see the sophistication continuing to increase, as I said before, given the attack tools that are out there, given the way in which those tools can randomize attack vectors, rotate attack vectors dynamically and automatically, those kinds of things.
Yeah, and that's the other part about it. It's not just the numbers, like you said, it's the
sophistication,
dynamic vectors and things like that. That's a big part of that as well from a DDoS perspective.
Yeah, the sophistication of attacks has changed a lot. If you go back 3 or 4 years, we used to see a lot of DDoS attacks. We used to see very high volume DDoS attacks, as we still do today. But the attack traffic was relatively predictable because of how it was generated. That has changed. Now the attacks are much less predictable. The attack vectors that are used within them are more dynamic, as I say, more rotation, more randomization, more use of spoofing source addresses to look like the traffic is coming from content providers and cloud providers to make it harder to block. More use of sophisticated application layer attack vectors over DNS and HTTPS. Things have really changed in that regard.
And even DDoS has become a part of a tool of bad actors, being able to use DDoS as part of a multi-layered attack as well. That's something I think is continuing to happen as well.
Yeah, so we quite often now see that DDoS is used as a part of a broader campaign against an organization, but you're also seeing the targeting change. So you used to see people's major web presences being targeted, then it moved on to their DNS. Now we're seeing, offload points for major offices, because fundamentally the attacker is trying to disrupt the day-to-day business continuity of an organization. So there's an awful lot of change going on there, and we're obviously staying ahead of that with our products, helping our customers to stay ahead of that in terms of how they use our intelligence, how they use our products, helping them on best practice for operational procedures, all of those kinds of things.
I also want to change gears a little bit. Fixed wireless access, FWA, it's become kind of a really important topic for being able to provide access.
Especially here. So,
exactly. Being able to provide access to certain regions, and I think it's a strong technology. But I'm just wondering, does it introduce some sort of unique security challenges?
It introduces some kind of what I would call old and new security challenges. And if you look at what we're seeing from our customers on fixed wireless access, today what we're kind of seeing is a lot of the same problems that have existed on wired networks for quite a while. So if you think about wired networks, you've got subscribers there, you've got gaming related DDoS, you've got compromised consumer IoT, you've got proxies, you've got aggressive scanning, a whole host of bad behaviors that have kind of been there for a while. As fixed wireless access rolls out, what we're seeing is a lot of that same infrastructure that caused problems on the wireline side moves onto the mobile networks.
Right.
So those mobile networks then experience all of those same bad behaviors. The challenge in the mobile space is that with the bandwidths that are there now in 5G and things like that, there's quite a lot of that traffic on a lot of these networks. And there are more bottlenecks in a mobile network than there are in wireline. There's more state being maintained within that mobile network. And operationally, the mobile network operators haven't kind of grown up with these threats in the same way that wireline operators have. So that, this is why I kind of talk about it as kind of new old problems. It's a problem that we've seen before in wireline, but it's kind of new to the mobile operators.
With a slightly different appearance.
And we're seeing our customers adapt to that by leveraging some of the same solutions they use on the wireline side, but adapted for mobile so that they operate there. We're looking at how they're sharing operational procedures, if they've got separate teams managing security from wireline into mobile. So there's a lot of that going on. But fixed wireless access is a big driver. But it's a huge opportunity for mobile operators in terms of revenue, new subscribers, but it does bring new threats.
Yeah. Maybe change gears a little bit as well. AI. I mean, obviously AI has got a huge focus on multiple levels. It's going to transform the industry on some level. But when you think about AI and security, I think AI has kind of maybe two sides to it. One is, we're starting to see some AI-based bad, threat vectors. So bad actors will always find a way to use.
In DDoS, trying to avoid capture and things like that.
So the intelligence of that is one part of it, but of course using AI as kind of a tool to be able to predictively, pick these up and do remediation and provide strategies is kind of an important part as well. I guess my question would be, for service providers who are looking at doing sort of AI-based threat detection, what sort of advice would you give them, or what sort of best practices as they kind of start on this journey? And they will have to start on it. Kind of a starting point. What should be some of their initial thoughts or best practices?
I think the key thing is to figure out what your priorities are around, where you see risk, where you see operational challenges within your organization. So if you look at many of the customers that I talk to, a lot of their challenges are in, dealing with the volume of threats that they already get today. How do they triage those threats? How do they investigate those threats? How do they mitigate those threats as they're evolving, as they're changing? AI can help with all of those things, in terms of automation, in terms of automating the way in which we select mitigation strategies, the way in which we use threat intelligence, the way in which we configure the underlying products. There's a lot of value that AI can bring there before we get on to detecting new kinds of threats. Because what you've got to be careful of is that, yes, AI can detect new kinds of threats, and yes, we can see things that we couldn't see before, but are you giving those new threats to a team that is already struggling to cope with the things that they've already got today? So you kind of got to solve one problem before you kind of introduce new load from somewhere else. So I would say focus on where your challenges are and where your highest levels of risk are, and apply AI in that direction.
Okay, that's good advice. I guess maybe the last question would be any other trends you think are really starting to influence security?
I think in security, the whole kind of, especially on the DDoS side, we are seeing a lot more intelligence in the way attackers are generating attacks. They are well resourced. There are some kind of nation-state affiliated adversaries out there that are very capable of using very sophisticated attack campaigns against organizations that are fairly long in length. So, you're not talking like a 10-minute DDoS attack. You're talking, hours every day for a month, that kind of thing. So that's kind of a key challenge, because you have to think about how do you deal with that? How do you operationally manage that if you've got to have people available to kind of report on that, mitigate that, figure out exactly what's going on? So That I think is a key change that we're seeing, as well as what I mentioned before about the broader targeting. It's not just the web presence, it's the office buildings, the offload points, the firewalls, the DNS.
Yeah.
It's a much bigger threat surface that they're going after today that needs to be defended appropriately.
Right. So more to follow.
Yeah.
More to follow. So anyway, Darren, thank you for joining me today, and yeah, a really interesting discussion. Thank you
Thanks for
very much.
speaking with me.
My pleasure.
Cheers.